Why did he think he could touch her? The question lingered in the silence, hanging heavier than the summer heat at Fort Artemis. One reckless hand, one arrogant move, and a female drill instructor who had spent her life waiting for moments exactly like this. The recruit's laugh had been loud, too loud, as though he wanted the whole training hall to hear. His confidence was borrowed, the kind of swagger that comes not from skill but from the weight of a famous last name. Private First Class Reed Donovan, son of a Pentagon colonel, third-generation soldier. He had been told since birth that the uniform would bend to him, not the other way around. So when he lunged forward, fingers reaching for her like it was a game, like it was a challenge, the room froze. The other recruits didn't even breathe. The sound of boots scuffing the mat was sharp in their ears. What they saw next would etch itself into memory, whispered years later in quiet barracks or over beers after deployments. Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne moved. Not with anger, not with hesitation, but with the kind of mechanical precision that didn't come from a handbook. Her body cut through the air in one seamless arc, a sidestep, a capture. His momentum turned against him in the blink of an eye, and suddenly the cocky private who thought he could prove a point lay face down on the mat, arm bent in a submission hold so unforgiving that even the stubborn had only one choice. Tap. Donovan's palm struck the mat again and again, desperation breaking through arrogance. His voice, usually dripping with entitlement, cracked into silence. Phones were already out. Fingers shook with adrenaline as recruits recorded the impossible. They weren't supposed to. They knew the rules, but this wasn't just a training scuffle. This was revelation. Because in that fleeting instant, as her sleeve slid back under the strain of the movement, a tattoo came into view. Not a delicate mark, not decoration, but a trident, bold, unmistakable, the kind of ink that didn't just carry history, it carried a burden. Whispers shot like sparks through the room. Did you see that? She's No way. No one said the word out loud. Not yet, but the silence afterward was different, heavier. Kieran Thorne stood above him, face unreadable, hand steady. She released the hold with surgical control, letting Donovan breathe again. He staggered to his feet, red-faced with shame more than pain. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence it cut like a blade. There is a difference between confidence and arrogance, Private. One keeps you alive in combat, the other gets your team killed. The words were not meant for him alone. They were meant for everyone watching. Donovan muttered something under his breath about his father, but it didn't matter. He could say what he wanted. The moment had already slipped away from him and into history. From the doorway, unseen until now, Captain Blackwood stood in shadow, watching, waiting. He had heard whispers when her transfer came in, the redacted lines on her file, the recommendations wrapped in coded language. And now, as he turned to leave the room, he knew the rumors weren't rumors at all. But the recruits didn't know that, not yet. For them, it began here, with a takedown so fast they could barely understand it, and a tattoo that told them everything and nothing at the same time. That night in the mess hall, the whispers didn't stop. Donovan tried to mask his humiliation with louder boasts, but the room had shifted. The arrogance that once followed him now felt brittle, cracked. And at a corner table, alone with her tray, Master Sergeant Thorne ate in silence. She wasn't looking for gratitude. She wasn't looking for fear, but she felt eyes on her every time she lifted her fork. The recruits didn't know whether to respect her or fear her, and that was exactly how it needed to be. Across the hall, Private Zephyr Hayes couldn't shake the image from her head, the speed, the control, and that ink. Hayes had been observant since day one. She noticed details others dismissed. The scar on Thorne's wrist she tried to hide. The reflexive reach toward her hip whenever loud noises broke the air, as if a sidearm should be there. Hayes had never seen anything like today's takedown, and she knew, instinctively, that this was not standard army. She couldn't prove it, not yet. But she wasn't the only one who felt the shift. The next morning, dawn stretched across Fort Artemis like a slow fire. Fog clung low, the kind that made sound feel muted, as though the world was holding its breath. Recruits stood stiff in formation, the sting of yesterday still clinging to them. Thorne moved down the line with measured steps, boot heels striking pavement like a clock no one could stop. She stopped by a young recruit whose collar sat slightly askew. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to. "Straighten that collar, Private." The girl's hands moved instantly, trembling. Her gaze locked forward, afraid to meet the drill instructor's eyes. It wasn't just fear of discipline. It was something deeper now. Something that came when you realized the person standing in front of you wasn't just another instructor reading from the same script. Captain Blackwood watched from his office window. He saw order. He saw efficiency. But he also saw something else, something that unsettled him. He reached for his phone. "She's integrating well enough," he said into the receiver, voice low. "But I still question why she was sent here. Her qualifications are excessive for basic training." A pause, silence on the other end. "Understood, I'll keep it contained." Contained, as though this was something dangerous. And maybe it was. Later that afternoon, under a blistering 93-degree sun, the recruits faced the obstacle course. The air shimmered with heat. Sweat poured. Breathing was heavy before it even began. Combat does not wait for ideal conditions. That's what Thorne told them. And then, without hesitation, she ran the course herself. Not to boast, not to humiliate, but to teach. Every movement was sharp, precise, economical. She wasted nothing, no breath, no step. It was like watching water flow, a quiet reminder that efficiency can be more devastating than brute force. Recruits whispered to each other, "That's not standard Army technique." Donovan heard it, jaw tightening. When his turn came, he attacked the course like a bull charging red cloth, power without control. Sweat burned his eyes. His body faltered halfway through. And then, beside him, the quiet voice of the woman he had mocked only hours before. "Control your breathing, efficiency over power." He wanted to snap back, to remind her of his lineage, his father, his grandfather, but the words caught in his throat as he pulled himself over the wall with clumsy strength. He landed heavy. He finished late, and for the first time he felt something worse than exhaustion: humiliation. That night he tried again to rally support in the mess hall. His voice rose, mocking, desperate. "She moves like she's trying to prove something. Women don't." Hayes interrupted as she passed with her tray. "Or maybe she's just good at her job." The table went quiet. Donovan's face hardened. His pride had taken a blow no amount of boasting could mend. Across the room, Thorne ate alone again, but this time Sergeant Winters slid into the seat across from her. "The Donovan kid's becoming a problem," Winters said flatly. Thorne only nodded. "I've handled worse." Winters studied her face. The silence between them held a weight. "Finally," she said, "rumor is you came from somewhere specialized." Thorne's fork paused midair, then continued. "There are a lot of rumors in the Army." Winters didn't smile. She didn't press. But her eyes had already caught a glimpse of something when Thorne's collar shifted. The edge of a tattoo, sharp lines forming what could only be the tip of a trident. She didn't ask, she didn't need to. Because some truths, once spoken, could never be taken back. And the truth was this: Fort Artemis was about to change. Not because of regulations, not because of politics, but because one woman refused to let arrogance masquerade as strength. And tomorrow, in the hand-to-hand combat facility, the truth would break wide open. Why would he smile like that? Everyone in the training hall felt it, that sharp edge of arrogance dripping from Donovan's grin as he stepped forward, volunteering too quickly. He wasn't eager to learn. He was eager to humiliate. Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne stood before the formation, voice calm, measured. She had just told them what combat meant when you faced someone larger, stronger, determined to overpower you. She spoke of leverage, efficiency, using an opponent's energy against them. Her words were quiet, but they carried weight. The kind of weight born not from theory but from years of proving them true. "I need a volunteer," she had said. And Donovan moved like a man who thought the moment belonged to him. "I'll go, Master Sergeant." His tone dripped with challenge, not respect. He wanted an audience. He wanted to prove that no technique could overcome raw strength. And more than that, he wanted to prove that no woman could hold her own against him. Whispers rippled through the recruits. Some leaned forward with interest. Others winced. They knew what was coming, though they didn't know how. From the back of the room, Captain Blackwood appeared in the doorway. He didn't announce himself. He didn't stop the exercise. Something in him told him to watch, to see where this would go. Thorne nodded once, unbothered. "Very well, Private Donovan. Attack with a standard frontal grab." But Donovan had no intention of keeping it standard. He wanted to embarrass her, to make her look weak in front of everyone. He lunged, not with training form but with both hands outstretched, reaching for her upper body in a way that was less military drill and more violation. The gasp that rose from the formation was instant, visceral. A line had been crossed. And in that fraction of a second, something inside Thorne shifted. Her posture changed. Her eyes sharpened with an intensity most of them had never seen before. The calm instructor melted away, replaced by something colder, harder, instinctive. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Donovan's grab never landed. Thorne sidestepped with ghost-like precision, her hand locking onto his leading arm. His momentum betrayed him, carrying his own weight forward. She rotated, fluid as water, redirecting all of it through his balance point. One heartbeat later, Donovan was on the mat, face down, arm twisted in a submission hold so clean it looked rehearsed, except for the raw shock etched across his face. He struggled once, futile. The hold tightened with surgical precision. Pain tore across his shoulder, white-hot and final. And then came the tap. Desperate, rapid, humiliated. The room fell into silence. No one breathed. But in the tension, one detail did not go unnoticed. Her sleeve had pulled back, just enough to reveal the truth. The ink burned into her skin, the trident, a symbol only one kind of warrior carried. Private Hayes saw it first. Her breath caught. The words slipped out before she could stop herself. "She's a SEAL." The whisper spread like wildfire, impossible to contain. Eyes widened. Phones tilted in shaky hands, capturing the aftermath despite every regulation they were breaking. Thorne released Donovan's arm with the same control she had applied in taking it. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply rose to her feet, calm as stone, while Donovan clutched his shoulder, his pride fractured more than his body. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it struck harder than the throw itself. "There is a difference between confidence and arrogance, Private. One keeps you alive in combat. The other gets your team killed." Every recruit felt the words carve into them. They weren't about Donovan. They were about all of them, about what it meant to carry a uniform that demanded more than ego. Donovan stood slowly, red-faced. His jaw clenched. His eyes flicked toward the phones, capturing his shame. He muttered, voice low but sharp enough for the silence to carry. "My father will hear about this." Thorne didn't flinch. She didn't soften. Her reply was steady, delivered for every ear in the room to hear. "Good. Tell him his son encountered someone who values competence over legacy. The battlefield doesn't care who your father is." The words landed like a strike, and from the doorway, Captain Blackwood stepped into the light. "Master Sergeant Thorne," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "My office now." He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned and left. Thorne gave one last glance at Sergeant Winters. Continue the defensive techniques, Sergeant. Yes, Master Sergeant. And with that, Thorne walked out. The room stayed frozen until Winters snapped her voice like a whip. Eyes front. Anyone caught with a phone will be doing push-ups until dinner. The recruits snapped to attention. Phones disappeared into pockets, screens darkened, but the image had already spread. Some clips were gone forever, deleted in panic, but not all of them, not enough. By evening, the video was circulating across Fort Artemis. By midnight, it had reached closed military message boards. By dawn, it was everywhere. The headlines varied. Some celebrated. Female drill instructor flawlessly counters aggressive recruit. Others twisted. Gender integration under scrutiny after viral takedown. And sitting in his office the next morning, Captain Blackwood watched the footage play on a national news feed. The image froze on Thorne's sleeve, the faint but unmistakable outline of the trident. Reporters speculated. Forums lit up. Theories exploded. The Pentagon remained silent, officially. Unofficially, Blackwood's phone had rung 3 times already that morning. Twice from the Pentagon, once from Naval Special Warfare Command. And the message was clear. Contain this. When Thorne stepped into his office, posture perfect, eyes unreadable, Blackwood studied her in silence. 2 soldiers, 2 worlds, and a storm that neither of them could stop now. The tap of a recruit's hand on a training mat had set something into motion, something bigger than Fort Artemis, something bigger than both of them. Because sometimes change doesn't ask permission. Sometimes it breaks in with one flawless move and refuses to be ignored. Why didn't she flinch? That was the question Captain Blackwood kept circling in his head as he studied the woman across from him. Most soldiers, when summoned to his office under the weight of Pentagon calls, would shift in their seat, avoid eye contact, show a crack of nerves, but not Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne. She sat ramrod straight, posture perfect, hands resting lightly on her knees. Her face was calm but not blank. She gave nothing away, not her thoughts, not her fears, not even her pride. On Blackwood's desk, the frozen video still glowed on the screen. Donovan pinned on the mat, Thorne's sleeve pulled back, the sharp edges of that tattoo burning like a brand. "You understand what this looks like," Blackwood said finally. His voice was even, but beneath it there was tension. "Do you know how many calls I've taken in the last 12 hours? Thorne's eyes didn't flicker. "Yes, sir, I can imagine." 2 were complaints, Blackwood continued. From Colonel Donovan himself. He believes you humiliated his son, says you exceeded protocol. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "With respect, sir, I maintained protocol. The recruit initiated inappropriate contact. I defended myself, efficiently." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Yes, and that's the only reason you're not facing disciplinary action." He hesitated. His tone softened, curiosity breaking through his irritation. "The 3rd call wasn't a complaint. It was from Naval Special Warfare Command. They reminded me that certain aspects of your record remain classified." Her eyes held steady, understood. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. He wanted to ask, he wanted to press. But he already knew the answer wouldn't come. Not here, not now. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk. Inside were pages filled with training program outlines, draft curriculum notes, and a cover memo stamped with Army Training Command's insignia. "This was prepared before yesterday's incident," Blackwood said. "We requested you specifically. Fort Artemis has been resistant to female integration in combat roles. The brass thought maybe you could change perspectives." Thorne raised an eyebrow just slightly. "You knew." "Not everything, but enough." She opened the folder. The request was clear. Develop an advanced hand-to-hand combat program. Focus on efficiency, on overcoming size and strength disparities, on proving that skill mattered more than brute force. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She closed the folder, resting her hands on it like a weight. I see. Blackwood leaned forward. They're sending a Pentagon liaison tomorrow, someone to manage this situation. Until then, continue your duties, quietly. No more viral moments. Thorne stood, giving a crisp salute. Yes, sir. But as she turned to leave, he saw something flicker across her face. A memory, maybe, or a shadow she couldn't shake. Outside, the air felt heavier than usual. Recruits moved about the base, whispers still trailing after her wherever she walked. Some avoided her gaze, others stared too long. Respect, fear, curiosity. Private Zephyr Hayes broke formation first. She jogged up to her, heels snapping together as she came to attention. At ease, Private, Thorne said, though her tone was still clipped. What is it? Hayes hesitated, then spoke quickly. The unit wanted you to know we deleted our copies of the video. Thorne raised an eyebrow. Why, it's already viral. Because we respect you, Hayes said simply. Her voice didn't waver. And because whatever you did before this, before Fort Artemis, we figure there's a reason it's not public knowledge. For the first time in days, something softened in Thorne's eyes. She allowed a fraction of her mask to slip, just enough for Hayes to see gratitude. Thank you, Private, that's considerate. Hayes shifted, nervous, then added, permission to speak freely, Master Sergeant. Granted. Most of us joined to serve something bigger than ourselves. Seeing you yesterday, it reminded us what that really means. For a moment, Thorne said nothing. She simply nodded once. Dismissed, Private. As Hayes walked away, Thorne caught movement in the corner of her eye. Sergeant Winters approached, arms folded, expression blunt as ever. Donovan's packing, Winters said flatly. Transfer or discharge? Thorne asked. Neither. He requested reassignment, said he needs to earn his place, not rely on his father's name. That made Thorne pause. A hint of surprise flickered across her face. Unexpected. He's in Barrack C if you want to speak with him, Winters said, studying her carefully. For what it's worth, I think yesterday might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. Thorne didn't respond immediately. She considered it, then turned her boots toward Barrack C. Donovan straightened the second she entered. His half-packed duffel lay on the cot. He stood at attention, jaw tight, pride still bruised but something different in his eyes. Master Sergeant, he acknowledged. At ease, Private. She studied him for a long moment. I hear you've requested reassignment. Yes, Master Sergeant. His voice carried less arrogance than before, a little more weight, a little more humility. Why? He hesitated, choosing his words. I called my father last night, not to complain, to tell him I encountered someone whose skill deserves recognition, not challenge. He told me maybe it was time I stopped leaning on his reputation. He met her eyes directly for the first time, his tone stripped bare. Yesterday made something clear, Master Sergeant. I've been acting like I already earned something. I haven't, I need to. The silence stretched. Thorne studied him, weighing the truth in his words. Then finally she spoke. Your transfer request is denied. Shock flickered across his face. I'm developing a new advanced combat training program here at Fort Artemis, she continued. Given your enthusiasm for testing techniques, I think you'd be a valuable participant. For the first time, Donovan's lips curved into something almost genuine, a small, unguarded smile. I'd be honored, Master Sergeant. Report to Training Facility B600. Don't be late. Yes, Master Sergeant. As she turned to leave, his voice followed her quietly. Thank you. She didn't answer, but at the doorway she allowed herself the smallest nod. The next morning Blackwood summoned her again. She expected another lecture, more warnings. Instead, when she stepped into his office, a figure was already waiting. A man in navy khakis, relaxed posture, familiar face. Commander Julian Rhee. Naval Special Warfare. Thorne stopped cold, her professional mask snapping tighter. "Commander." He smiled faintly. "It's been a while." Her voice didn't betray a thing. "I didn't expect to see you here." "When your name came up in connection with the video," Ree said easily, "I volunteered. Figured you might prefer dealing with someone who understands context." Blackwood glanced between them, unsettled. "The two of you know each other." Ree didn't hesitate. "The Master Sergeant and I share history. She was part of an operation my team supported in 2019. Blackwood frowned but nodded slowly. "I'll give you two privacy." And just like that, Thorne was left alone with a man who knew her secrets. "You're looking well," Ree said, his tone shifting softer now. "Army life suits you." "It's different," she replied neutrally. "Why are you really here, Commander?" Ree's expression hardened. "The videos created complications. Your tattoo is visible in several frames. Naval Special Warfare is concerned. You were one of the first women to qualify as a SEAL. Your identity was protected for your safety and for operational security. Now people are talking." Thorne held his gaze. "My status was never classified, only the operations." "True, but now internet forums are digging, connecting dots. Some are too close already." Her silence stretched, unbroken. "What does Naval Special Warfare want me to do?" she asked finally. "For now," Ree said, "continue your current assignment. Keep building this program. We'll handle the media side. But Thorne," his voice lowered, "the Joint Chiefs are watching. What happened here may change more than just this base." He smiled faintly, almost proud. "Off the record, that was one hell of a takedown." And just like that, the storm outside her control grew bigger. Because what began as one arrogant grab on a training mat was now reaching the halls of power. And whether she wanted it or not, Kieran Thorne was no longer just an instructor. She was a symbol. Why were they standing straighter than usual? The recruits waited in formation at Training Facility B, 20 of them selected by hand. Not for their scores, not for their names, but for something harder to measure: aptitude, attitude, and the flicker of potential that couldn't be faked. Their eyes tracked her as she entered, not with fear, not quite with respect either, something heavier: expectation. Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne didn't break stride. She moved to the front, her boots striking the floor with steady rhythm. "This program will be unlike standard training," she said without preamble. Her voice carried the same clipped precision it always had, but there was a new edge to it now, as though even she understood the weight of the moment. "You were chosen because you have something worth sharpening. What you learn here goes beyond basic hand-to-hand combat. It's about understanding how to neutralize threats regardless of physical disparities. This is not about brute force. It's about survival." Silence answered her. Not the inattentive silence of recruits too afraid to speak, but the sharpened kind that comes when every word is being absorbed. Then she moved. For the next hour, she demonstrated techniques most Army instructors wouldn't recognize. Movements drawn from a dozen different combat systems, adapted into something leaner, harsher, efficient. Techniques built not for a parade ground, but for situations where one mistake meant someone didn't come home. The recruits were locked in. Private Hayes especially seemed to grasp the principles instinctively. She didn't just copy the movements, she understood them. She mirrored Thorne's balance shifts, adjusted her stance with each correction, eyes sharp with comprehension. Donovan, on the other hand, was all muscle straining against new lessons. His body resisted the change at first, too used to thinking power was enough. But when Thorne paired him against Hayes, the shift became undeniable. Hayes moved like water, redirecting his momentum, forcing him off balance again and again. Donovan grunted, frustrated, but kept coming. Each time she countered smoother, faster. And slowly the arrogance in Donovan's eyes shifted into something else: respect. By the end of the session, sweat soaked through every uniform. The recruit stood straighter, breathing hard, eyes lit with a kind of hunger Thorne hadn't seen before. She dismissed them without ceremony. "Tomorrow, same time, do not be late." As they filed out, Donovan lingered. He hesitated, then approached. "Master Sergeant, may I ask something?" "Proceed." "These techniques, they're not standard army." He paused, swallowing. "Are they based on your previous experience?" The silence stretched. Thorne studied him, gauging his intent. Was this curiosity a trap, a veiled challenge? "They're adapted from various combat systems," she said finally. Her tone gave nothing away. "Effectiveness is what matters, not source." Donovan nodded once. No sarcasm this time, just quiet acknowledgement. "They're effective. Thank you, Master Sergeant." He left without another word. Over the next week, the program spread like fire through Fort Artemis. The 20 selected recruits moved differently now. Confident, sharper, their discipline hardened by something beyond rote drills. Other instructors began observing sessions, scribbling notes, quietly incorporating elements into their own training. Word spread through barracks. Soldiers from other units started requesting transfers, citing interest in the new methods. Even Captain Blackwood noticed. Reports crossed his desk noting improvements in performance metrics, fewer disciplinary issues, sharper teamwork. One evening, Sergeant Winters sat across from Thorne in the instructor's mess, coffee steaming between them. "Your program's changing things," Winters said bluntly. "I've never seen recruits this motivated." "They were always capable," Thorne replied. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of thought. "They just needed the right approach." Winters leaned in slightly. "It's more than that. You've changed how they see themselves, especially the female recruits. Hayes is already talking about applying to Ranger School." Thorne allowed herself the smallest smile. She'd do well there. "Because of you," Winters pressed. "You've shown them what's possible." Thorne shook her head. "I've given them tools. They'll decide what's possible." But inside she felt the conflict tug. This was never supposed to be about her. She had wanted obscurity, anonymity, a quiet posting, a way to serve without eyes on her past. Now every day those eyes grew sharper. Every movement she made was dissected, mirrored, imitated. She was no longer just an instructor. She was a symbol, whether she wanted it or not. Late one afternoon, Captain Blackwood summoned her to his office. The privacy screen on his computer glowed faintly when she entered. "We have a situation," he said. His voice was grave. Thorne stood at attention, calm but alert. "Sir, someone has identified you from the video." He tapped the monitor. "A reporter is asking questions about your service record. They claim to have a source inside the Pentagon." Thorne's face didn't change, but inside, her pulse steadied into something colder. "What specifically are they asking?" "Whether you were part of a classified program integrating women into special operations. Whether you were one of the first." Blackwood leaned forward. His tone carried concern, not accusation. "Thorne, I need to know how sensitive this is. Are we dealing with a security breach?" She weighed her answer carefully. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "The program itself isn't classified. The operations were. My participation was not widely known, but it was never officially secret. The danger is not my identity. It's exposing operational details, or others." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Commander Ree has been notified. They'll handle the press. In the meantime, continue training. We can't appear reactive." "Yes, sir." But as she turned to leave, she caught sight of the paused video on his screen. Her sleeve pulled back, the tattoo exposed. A trident, once a mark of belonging, now a target. That evening after drills, whispers swirled thicker than ever. Recruits didn't meet her gaze. Conversations died when she approached. Finally, Hayes waited after dismissal. "Permission to speak freely, Master Sergeant." "Granted." "There's a story online about you." Hayes's voice was careful. "It says you were one of the first female Navy SEALs, part of some integration program." Thorne's face remained unreadable. "And what do you think about that, Private?" Hayes swallowed, but her voice steadied. "I think whoever you were before doesn't matter. What matters is what you're doing now. You're making us better soldiers. The rest isn't our business." For a moment, Thorne's gaze softened. A flicker of recognition. Hayes reminded her of someone she used to be, young, determined, still believing service was about something bigger than yourself. "That's a wise perspective, Private." Hayes straightened, pride flickering across her face. "Dismissed." As Hayes walked away, Thorne allowed herself a long breath. But her phone buzzed moments later, a secure message. "Story contained. Source identified and addressed. Proceed with training as planned. Higher levels taking interest. Re." She stared at the screen for a long time before setting it down. It had begun as an assignment, a way to serve quietly, a place to disappear. Now it was something else, something much larger. The viral video, the whispers, the questions, they weren't just distractions. They were cracks in a wall that had stood for decades. And through those cracks, something new was forcing its way in. Whether she liked it or not, Kieran Thorne was at the center of it. The following morning, Captain Blackwood handed her a folder. His expression was unreadable. "New orders. The Advanced Combat Training Program has been officially recognized by Army Training Command. They want it expanded to other bases." Thorne opened the folder, scanning the directives, her brow furrowed. That was fast. "The video accelerated interest," Blackwood said dryly. Then he placed a second folder on the desk. This one was thinner, classified. "This came directly from Naval Special Warfare. Commander Ree said you'd understand." Alone in her quarters, she opened it. Inside, a memo authorized her to incorporate specific techniques from her special operations training into the Army curriculum. Techniques once restricted to elite units. The note at the bottom was simple, signed by the Joint Chiefs. "Your actions have demonstrated the value of integrated approaches. Expand the program under your direction. This represents a significant step in evolving combat readiness." Thorne closed the folder, her hand resting on its cover. The path she had fought so hard to carve in silence was now being handed to her, wide open. It wasn't what she asked for. It wasn't what she wanted. But it was what was needed. And Fort Artemis was only the beginning. Why did the base feel different now? It wasn't the buildings, not the drills, not the clanging weights or the gunfire from the range. Those were the same. It was the air, the way recruits carried themselves, the way conversations paused when she passed, not out of fear now, but with a kind of sharpened attention. Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne noticed it everywhere. The quiet changes, the subtle shifts. Recruits ran harder, stayed later, corrected each other with words she had used only once. Instructors adjusted techniques. Even old guard sergeants, men who once muttered about quotas and politics, now stood in the corner of Training Facility B, watching closely, scribbling notes they would never admit they were taking. The program was no longer a rumor. It was a current running through Fort Artemis, altering everything it touched. By week's end, the 20 recruits in the advanced program moved differently. Their bodies were sharper, their timing crisper. But more than that, they believed differently. Private Hayes was first to stand out. She absorbed technique like breath, her eyes hungry, her movements precise. She wasn't the fastest or strongest, but she was the most relentless. When others collapsed during drills, she found another ounce of grit. When Thorne corrected her grip, she repeated it until her knuckles were raw. And when another recruit stumbled during a difficult counter, Hayes didn't mock. She stepped in, voice calm, explaining what she had just learned herself. Leadership wasn't granted, it revealed itself, and Hayes carried it without even knowing it. Donovan was different too. Gone was the cocky swagger, the sarcastic smirk. Humiliation had stripped him clean, but it hadn't left him empty. It had left him hungry. Now he showed up early, sweat darkening his shirt before others even arrived. He asked questions, not to challenge but to understand. And when paired against Hayes, he no longer sneered at losing to someone smaller. He studied her movements, tried to replicate them, nodded when she corrected him. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was change. And Thorne saw it all. She didn't praise. She didn't soften. She simply filed it away in her mind, the quiet satisfaction buried beneath her controlled exterior. Commander Ree returned on the 7th day. His arrival was quiet but not invisible. Naval special warfare uniforms weren't common here, and his presence sent whispers rushing through the ranks. By the time he reached Training Facility B, half the base already knew. He stood in the observation area as Thorne moved among her recruits, correcting, demonstrating, commanding with the same steady presence she always carried. He didn't interrupt, didn't announce himself, just watched. When the session ended and the recruits filed out, drenched in sweat but eyes lit with fire, Thorne finally turned toward him. "Commander." "Master Sergeant," he returned, smiling faintly. "Impressive program you've built here." "Thank you, sir." "Walk with me." They stepped out into the late afternoon sun. Shadows stretched long across the parade ground. For a while, they walked in silence, the rhythm of boots on pavement their only conversation. Finally Ree spoke. "You've caused quite a stir." "That was not my intention, sir." "I know." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But intentions and outcomes rarely align. You understand that better than most." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. "The Joint Chiefs are reconsidering integration policies," Ree continued. "Your actions may have changed more than this base, maybe more than you realize." Her jaw clenched, though her face stayed calm. The recruits were always capable. They just needed a chance. He studied her for a moment, then stopped walking. His voice dropped lower. "Naval Special Warfare is establishing a new training initiative for female operators, not public yet, authorized at the highest levels. They want you to consult." The air thickened. Thorne's face betrayed nothing, but inside something twisted. She had fought battles most would never know about, spilled blood no history book would record. She hadn't done it for recognition. She hadn't done it for politics. And she certainly hadn't done it to become anyone's symbol. "I'm currently assigned here," she said carefully. "This wouldn't be a transfer. Inter-service cooperation. You'd consult while maintaining this program." She considered, "Why now?" "You know why," Ree said frankly. "That video, that trident. For decades people argued it wasn't possible. You proved it in front of the world. That window won't stay open forever." He offered his hand. "Review the packet, think about it. For what it's worth, I think you're exactly who we need. Someone who's done it without seeking recognition." Thorne shook his hand, her grip steady. But inside, memories pressed like ghosts. That night she sat alone in her quarters, packet unopened on her desk. Her hand drifted to her sleeve, fingertips brushing the ink hidden beneath fabric. The trident, once it had been pride, then it became a secret. Now it was a question. Her eyes closed and the memories returned. Not the glory, there was never glory, just the weight. Dark water closing in around her, the press of salt against her lungs. A mission brief whispered in a language no one outside that room would ever hear. Faces of teammates laughing in the dark, silent in the aftermath. Some alive, some gone. Losses that could never be mourned in daylight. She had carried it all, in silence, always in silence. And now they wanted her to speak without speaking, to teach without revealing, to be the bridge between what had been denied and what might become possible. Her eyes opened. She stared at the packet, still closed, still heavy. The next morning, Sergeant Winters found her on the training field before dawn. "You don't sleep much, do you? Winters asked, stepping beside her. Sleep overrated. Winters studied her face, then glanced toward the recruits gathering in the distance. They look at you differently now. Thorne's jaw tightened. I'm not here to be looked at. No, Winters agreed softly. But whether you want it or not, you've become something to them. Proof, a reminder, a reason. For a long moment, Thorne said nothing. She watched Hayes correcting another recruit's stance, Donovan pushing himself until his arms shook. Finally she spoke, her voice low. Proof comes at a cost. Winters nodded. I imagine you'd know. By the second week, the program had reshaped the rhythm of Fort Artemis. Morning PT buzzed with new energy. Drill sergeants incorporated her methods into their routines. Rumors spread to other bases, requests for observation flooding in. And the recruits closest to her, Hayes, Donovan, and a handful of others, were different now. They carried themselves with quiet confidence, no longer chasing bravado. During one drill, Hayes executed a variation of a counter Thorne had only demonstrated once, perfectly. Thorne called her over. Where did you learn that? I watched you, Hayes said simply, and I practiced off hours. That move takes weeks to master. I had a good teacher. For a moment, Thorne felt something she rarely allowed, pride. She dismissed it quickly, but the thought lingered. That evening she walked the base alone, the sun dipping low behind the barracks. The air was quiet, the kind of quiet that always came before change. Her phone buzzed, an unlisted number, a secure line. She answered. A voice from her past, one she hadn't heard in years, her former commanding officer. Heard about the program, he said simply, and the new initiative. The door you've opened will benefit many who follow. Well done. The line went dead before she could respond. She stood still, phone heavy in her hand. For years her service had been shadow, invisible, buried beneath classified files and redactions. Losses no one knew, sacrifices no one would ever honor. And now recognition was coming from the last place she expected. Not from the public, not from politicians, but from those who understood. Her eyes lifted toward the barracks, where lights burned late into the night. Recruits training longer, harder, because they believed. And for the first time in weeks, she let the thought settle. Maybe this was worth it. Not for her, never for her, but for all those who would come after. On the parade ground, shadows stretched long. Thorne stood alone, staring at the base she never asked to change, yet had already reshaped. She touched the ink hidden beneath her sleeve, not as a badge, not as a boast, but as a reminder. The past had forged her, the present demanded her, the future that was no longer hers to carry alone. And in the distance, footsteps echoed. Hayes walking toward her, eager, eyes burning with the same fire Thorne once carried. The cycle beginning again. Why were they here so early? The recruits noticed first. The unfamiliar cars rolling through Fort Artemis before dawn, the crisp suits stepping out behind the uniformed escorts. By the time word spread, whispers had already raced through the barracks. A congressional delegation, high-ranking officers, observers with clipboards and careful eyes. The kind of people who didn't come to watch training, unless the training mattered. Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne knew before anyone told her. The air carried it, heavy and sharp. By the time Captain Blackwood summoned her, she was already on her way. They're here to see your program, he said, voice tight. Don't put on a show, don't choreograph, they want to see the truth. Her face didn't move, but inside something coiled. The truth was never clean. The truth was messy, raw, unfinished, but maybe that was exactly the point. Yes, sir. Training facility B looked different that morning. Not in its layout, the mats, the equipment, the scuffed walls remained the same. But along the observation deck, rows of polished shoes stood still, eyes fixed on the recruits assembling below. Congressional staffers whispered into phones. Generals folded their arms, their expressions unreadable. Thorne entered without ceremony. No smile, no bow, just presence. "Form up." The recruit snapped into position. She moved down the line, eyes sharp, checking posture, stances, equipment. When she stopped, the silence was taut. "Today," she said evenly, "you will demonstrate not performance, not spectacle, but process. Combat is never clean, show them the work." She paired them deliberately. Hayes against Donovan, the smallest against the strongest, not for humiliation, for proof. "Begin." Donovan attacked first, his movements heavier than Hayes's but disciplined now. He no longer lunged with arrogance. He moved with control, the lessons drilled into him. Hayes countered with precision, redirecting his weight, forcing him to adjust. The observers leaned forward. Again and again, Donovan came at her. And again, Hayes slipped aside, using angles, leverage, timing. Once, Donovan nearly overpowered her, his strength pressing her close to the mat, but Hayes twisted, dropped, and reversed, pinning him clean. The room shifted. The delegation saw it, not theory, not rhetoric, proof. Respect gleamed faintly in Donovan's eyes as he tapped out. He rose without complaint, nodding at Hayes, acknowledging her victory. The humility in that gesture said as much as the technique itself. The observers murmured, notes scribbled faster. Thorne's voice broke the silence. "What you see here is not strength against weakness. It is training against habit. It is efficiency against assumption. This is combat discipline." Her words carried more weight than volume. They struck because they were lived, not rehearsed. After drills, she dismissed the recruits. Sweat soaked their uniforms, but their heads were high. Captain Blackwood approached, face controlled, but Thorne saw the flicker in his eyes. The delegation wanted to meet. She entered the conference room minutes later. The air was thick with authority. Congresswomen, generals, senior staffers, faces that made decisions she had never been invited to. "Master Sergeant Thorne," the senior congresswoman said, extending her hand. "Your program is impressive." Thorne shook it, posture straight. "Thank you, ma'am. The credit belongs to the recruit's dedication." The congresswoman smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but vision and leadership create the conditions for success, and we've seen both today." She turned to the generals. "I believe we've seen enough." Conversations hummed. Words like expansion, doctrine, integration floated in the air. Thorne stood silently, her hands behind her back. She had stood in rooms with stakes far greater, where lives balanced on whispers. But this carried a different kind of weight. Not life and death, but legacy. A four-star general approached her privately before leaving. His voice was low, for her ears alone. 20 years ago," he admitted, "I would have said what you're doing was impossible. I was wrong. What you've built here will change our military's future capabilities." Thorne's face didn't move. Her voice was steady. "That is the goal, sir." But inside, something twisted. She had never wanted to change the military. She only wanted to serve, quietly, effectively, without recognition. And now, she was being asked to become something larger than herself. That evening, Fort Artemis held a small reception. Nothing extravagant, just instructors, staff, a few recruits allowed to attend. The mood buzzed with something rare, celebration. Captain Blackwood raised a glass. "Beginning next month, Fort Artemis will host instructors from other bases to learn these techniques. Master Sergeant Thorne will oversee their training." Applause rippled. Recruits glanced at her, pride burning in their eyes. Sergeant Winters approached, handing her a glass of punch. "To quiet revolutions," she said softly. Thorne lifted her glass, touching it lightly against Winters's, but she didn't drink. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the night pressed against the glass, silent and unyielding. Later, she found herself alone on the parade ground, the same place she had stood weeks ago during her first inspection. The base looked different now, not in its buildings but in its pulse. The energy carried change, not loud, not dramatic, quiet, relentless. She thought of the recruits. Hayes, determined, carrying a spark she recognized too well. Donovan, reshaped by humility. Others, learning to see themselves not as quotas or burdens but as capable soldiers. She thought of the video, the trident, the whispers that refused to die. None of it had been her plan. None of it had been her choice. But maybe choice was never the point. Sometimes the world handed you a role you never asked for. Sometimes the only dignity left was to carry it well. She stood still, the night air cool on her skin. Somewhere inside the barracks, laughter echoed. Recruits bonding, arguing, living in the small spaces between exhaustion. And Thorne remained alone, staring at the stars. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't want legacy. But legacy was coming anyway. And with it, a weight she knew too well. The next morning she entered Training Facility B early. The mats were empty. The air was still. She stood in the center, closing her eyes for a moment. The silence pressed around her, and memories slipped in. The faces of her old unit, men and women who had carried the same weight, some lost to missions no one would speak of, others still in the shadows, unseen, unheard. They had served not for recognition, but because someone had to. She touched the tattoo beneath her sleeve, for them, for all of it. When the recruits arrived minutes later, they found her already waiting. Her eyes were steady, her voice calm. Form up. The work wasn't finished. It never would be. And maybe that was the point. Because revolutions weren't loud. They weren't sudden. They were built one session, one correction, one quiet decision at a time. And at Fort Artemis, the quiet revolution was already in motion. Why did the knock feel heavier than usual? Thorne didn't flinch at knocks. Years of training had taught her to rise for the sudden, the unexpected, the unwelcome. But this one, sharp, deliberate, carried weight. She opened the door. Commander Ree stood there, crisp uniform, unreadable face, Captain Blackwood at his side. "Master Sergeant," Ree said without preamble, "we have a situation that requires your expertise." In Blackwood's office, the door closed behind them, and the privacy lock hummed faintly. Ree didn't waste time. "A congressional delegation came here yesterday. They saw what they needed. The Joint Chiefs are moving faster than expected." Thorne's face remained calm, but inside she braced. "They're greenlighting a new initiative," Ree continued. "A training program for female operators, not public knowledge yet but authorized. They want you to consult." Her silence stretched. The weight of the words pressed heavy in the room. Blackwood spoke quietly. "They're asking Thorne, but from what I've seen they won't take no for an answer." Ree leaned forward. "This isn't a transfer. You'll stay here running your program, but you'll also advise on theirs. They need someone who's been there." The words cut deep. Been there, few even knew what they meant. Her voice was steady. "Why now?" "Because of you," Ree said simply. "That video proved what people argued for decades wasn't possible. You embodied it without meaning to. That moment cracked the door open. They want to push it wider before it closes again." Thorne's eyes flicked downward. Her sleeve tugged against her wrist, ink burning beneath fabric. Her voice was low, almost to herself. "Doors don't open without cost." Ree held her gaze. "I know, which is why you're the right one to help carry it." That night alone, the memories pressed harder. She remembered the cold water closing in around her lungs during the moments when instructors screamed in her face, daring her to quit, betting she would. The bone-deep exhaustion. The silent pact with herself. One more step, one more breath, one more wave. She remembered the first deployment. The weight of the gear, the darkness pressing in, the silence before the breach. The flash of gunfire, the quickness of death, the split-second decisions that haunted her long after. She remembered the ones she lost, faces she could never name, burials without flags, sacrifices erased in the service of missions that would never be acknowledged. She had carried it all in silence. The tattoo was not pride, it was memory, burden, a scar carved in ink. And now they wanted her to carry it again, this time in daylight. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. She hadn't cried in years, not for herself, not for anyone. The next morning, the recruits found her already waiting on the mat. Her voice was even, but sharper than usual. "Form up, today we push harder." They drilled until sweat soaked through uniforms, until muscles shook, until the weaker ones thought they'd collapse, and then she pushed them further. Hayes held her ground, grit in every movement, correcting her partner even while her arms trembled. Donovan matched her not with arrogance but with determination. Every time he fell, he got back up. No complaints, no excuses. Thorne watched them both. Hayes, who carried possibility like a torch. Donovan, who carried change like a wound. It wasn't just training anymore, it was proof. To the observers, to the army, to the recruits themselves. Proof that possibility was real. After drills, Hayes lingered. She approached, hesitant but determined. "Master Sergeant, may I ask something?" "You may ask, I may not answer." Hayes swallowed. "Was it worth it, everything you went through to become who you are?" The question landed like a blow. Thorne didn't answer right away. She looked at Hayes, the youth in her face, the fire in her eyes. The same fire she once carried before it was burned into embers. Finally she spoke, voice low, almost fragile. "It was never about me, Private. It was about creating possibilities that didn't exist before." Hayes nodded slowly, "Like what you're doing now." "Exactly like that." "Then yes," Hayes said softly, "it was worth it." She turned to leave, but Thorne stopped her. "Private Hayes," she said, "after basic, I'll be recommending you for advanced training. Beyond standard army. It won't be easy. It will challenge every limit you have." Hayes straightened, fire in her eyes. "I'll be ready." Thorne nodded once, dismissed. Later, Thorne walked the base alone, her boots striking pavement in steady rhythm. She saw the shifts everywhere, women and men training side by side without hesitation, instructors adopting techniques she'd introduced, a culture bending toward something new. Her phone buzzed, another secure message from Re. "Joint Chiefs request preliminary consultation. Washington next week. Program brief to follow." Her hand tightened around the phone. She had wanted obscurity, a quiet posting, a way to serve without being seen. But obscurity was gone. Now she was the example, the face, the proof. And she would carry it, not because she wanted to, but because no one else could. That evening, Sergeant Winters found her standing at the edge of the parade ground, watching the sky fade into dusk. "Ree told me about the new initiative," Winters said. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "That was quick." "He thought you might want to talk to someone." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Winters spoke again. "For what it's worth, I think you should do it." "Why?" "Because you've already changed things here more than you realize." Winters gestured toward the barracks. "Donovan wasn't the only one who adjusted. The culture is shifting. One incident doesn't change everything, but it starts the process. You've shown them it's possible." Thorne's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "That was never why I served." Winters gave a rare smile. "Exactly, that's why it matters." They stood in silence as the last light bled from the sky. Alone in her quarters, Thorne opened the packet Ree had given her. Detailed proposals, training outlines, integration plans. Her eyes moved over the words, but her mind drifted to faces she would never forget. Her old unit, the first woman to ever make it through selection beside her, lost on a mission no one could acknowledge. The men who had treated her as equal only after she bled beside them. The nights spent staring at ceilings, knowing tomorrow meant more silence, more secrets. She touched the tattoo beneath her sleeve. Not for pride, not for herself, but for them. She closed the folder, decision forming like steel. She would consult, she would teach, she would carry the weight. Not for recognition, not for history, but for those who would follow, so they would not have to carry it alone. The next day the recruits found her sharper than ever, every correction precise, every drill pushed harder. She demanded more, not just from them, but from herself. Because the future was no longer abstract. It was standing in front of her, sweating, straining, refusing to quit. And though she had never asked to be their symbol, she would not let them down. That night she stood again on the parade ground. Stars cut across the sky, cold and distant. She thought of what Hayes had asked. Was it worth it? Her lips parted, the answer soft enough only the night could hear. It was never about worth. It was about necessity. She let the silence settle, heavy but clean. Because sometimes dignity didn't speak, it carried. And tomorrow she would carry again. Why did the silence feel heavier than combat? The room was full Joint Chiefs at the long oak table, congressional staffers with pens poised, aides whispering in corners. The flag stood tall, the seal of the Pentagon etched into the wall. Power radiated from every seat. And yet, when Master Sergeant Kieran Thorne stepped inside, the silence deepened. They expected someone different, someone eager, loud, political. Instead, they got her. Steady, composed, presence carved by years no file could fully record. Master Sergeant, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said, "We're here to discuss the future of integration. You've been asked to consult. Speak freely." Her eyes moved across the table. Faces polished by years of speeches, decisions, policies. Faces that had never crouched in sand waiting for the breach call. Faces that would never know the cold bite of water at 3 a.m., lungs screaming, instructors daring you to quit. Her voice when it came was low, even unshaken. You want results, you want proof, but proof doesn't come from policy. It comes from training, from sweat, from blood. If you want female operators to succeed, you cannot build them separate. You cannot treat them like exceptions. You train them as soldiers, equal, nothing less, nothing more. The room was still. One congressman leaned forward. And what about the risks, cohesion, tradition? Her gaze didn't waver. Tradition doesn't stop bullets. Cohesion is built on respect, not gender, and risks. Every mission is risk. Integration doesn't add risk. It adds capability. Her words weren't polished. They weren't rehearsed. They were truth, sharp as steel, drawn from years of silence. And for once, silence met silence. No rebuttal, no scoff, just the weight of understanding settling over the room. Back at Fort Artemis, Private Hayes pushed through another drill. Sweat streamed down her face, arms trembling as she forced herself through the counter Thorne had shown her weeks ago. Donovan stood nearby, spotting her, his voice steady. "You've got it again." She did, and this time she didn't falter. The others watched, not with skepticism now, with respect. Because Hayes had become something more than a recruit. She had become proof. And proof spreads. In Washington, the session ended. Reed caught up with Thorne in the corridor, his voice low. "You gave them what they needed. Not what they expected, but what they needed." Her jaw tightened. "They'll twist it, they'll make it politics." "Maybe, but they'll move forward. And that's because of you." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. That night in her hotel room, Thorne sat by the window overlooking the city. Lights stretched endlessly, cars moving like veins of fire. Decisions made in these buildings shaped wars and futures. But change started on mats, on ranges, in small rooms with sweat-stained walls. And that's where she belonged. When she returned to Fort Artemis, the recruits were waiting. Not out of order, not out of protocol, just waiting. Hayes stood in front, eyes sharper now. Donovan beside her, his arrogance long burned away. "Permission to speak freely, Master Sergeant," Hayes asked. "Granted. We heard you went to Washington. We just wanted to say thank you." Thorne's gaze swept over them. The recruits she had trained, shaped, sharpened, proof standing in formation. She didn't smile, but something softened in her eyes. "Don't thank me," she said evenly. "Prove me right out there where it matters." The recruits straightened, their resolve visible. Weeks later, the directive arrived, official, stamped with seals and signatures. The Advanced Combat Program would expand to 5 more bases. Integration policies would be reviewed, rewritten. And the initiative for female operators, once whispered, once denied, was moving forward. At Fort Artemis, drills continued. Recruits sweated, strained, improved. Hayes rose higher, Donovan steadied, the rest followed. And Thorne remained, teaching, correcting, demanding, never soft, never easy. Because this wasn't about her, it never was. It was about the ones who came after. One evening after dismissal, Thorne lingered on the parade ground. The sun bled orange across the horizon, shadows long, the air heavy with silence. Sergeant Winters joined her. "You realize you've changed things forever, right?" Thorne shook her head. "I've only shown what was always possible." Winters smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." They stood in silence, watching the recruits disperse into the twilight. Later that night, Thorne sat alone in her quarters. The folder from Washington lay closed on her desk. She didn't need to read it again. Her hand touched the tattoo beneath her sleeve. The trident, the burden, the memory. Once it had been a mark of silence, a secret carried in shadows. Now it was a reminder that dignity doesn't always speak. It acts quietly, relentlessly. She closed her eyes, hearing echoes of water, sand, silence. Then the sound of recruits on mats, grunting, refusing to quit. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a breath that felt almost light. On the parade ground the next morning, she stood waiting as the recruits formed up. Hayes in front, Donovan beside her, the others sharp and ready. They looked at her not just as an instructor, not just as a soldier, but as proof. And Thorne spoke, her voice steady, unshaken, final. "Form up, let's get to work." Because revolutions didn't announce themselves. They didn't shout. They didn't seek glory. They moved quietly, through sweat, through silence, through dignity. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.